My name is Jen Swanson, and I'm a consultant working in the digital transformation space. I have been independent for almost 4 years, which I can't even really believe because in some ways it feels like forever, and in other ways it feels like it just was yesterday that I was getting started. But I get asked a lot, sometimes almost weekly, to talk with seasoned professionals in my network about what it takes to switch from corporate into consulting, either on an independent basis or on a fractional, as like a fractional expert or a long-term contractor. And we're going to talk about what all those terms mean later in the presentation. So my reason for doing this webinar is a little selfish. I wanted to create some content that I could use when I get asked to share these perspectives, but don't necessarily have the time to do them all because, after all, my income comes from consulting, not necessarily from helping other people consult, although there are great businesses out there that do that. But it's sometimes hard for me to take on all the connections that I'm asked to take on in doing this. So it's a little bit selfish on that regard. And so that's part of why we're recording this session. And as I just said, we're going to stop the recording for the Q&A section so that you guys can feel a little more free to ask questions and not feel like you're going to be up on YouTube asking those questions sometime in the future. It also means that you'll be able to get a copy of this. If you missed something, you want to go back to it, you want to share it with somebody else, you want to forward it on, or refer to it later, and then I will get to use it for the same reason. I can send it to people who are interested in learning more about how I got into consulting and sort of some of my tips and tricks and recommendations. So typically when I meet people, and they're asking me these questions about going out on their own and consulting, they're coming off of a few decades of what I would describe as client-side work, right? They've been rising through the ranks of corporations and organizations or big enterprises, and they've been building seniority, and they've been building their experience, and they've been building their resume along the way. And lots of folks have taken a long and winding road, right? That certainly was my story, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. And others have taken sort of the direct route management track where they started at the beginning and they, kind of went all the way from entry level all the way up to C-suite. And then something happens, right? It might be a layoff, a personal crisis, burnout, a sense that there's something better for them outside the corporate structure. So they start thinking about consulting and exploring what that might look like for them. And there really are three primary reasons that I hear about why people are considering this shift from corporate into consulting. And usually it's something around autonomy. Sometimes it's about doing the work that they're interested in. That was, again, part of my story. I was kind of tired of being in the leadership track and just doing Excel spreadsheets all day. I wanted to actually have my hands in the work that I love to do. And a lot of people believe it's going to be a better fit for them and their life long term, right? So those are some common themes. But there's also common things that kind of hold people back, and or questions they have or things they think they have to figure out before they go out. And that's really what is behind the content today. Some of the myths and some of the things that I think are the logistics holding people back that make them leery of taking the jump into consulting. And so we're going to talk about that as well. So that's kind of our agenda for today. First, though, I have to just remind you, this is my not so legal disclaimer, is that nothing I'm telling you today should be considered like a directive or, advice specific to you and your business. You know your personal finances best, your personal situation best, and only you are going to know if you're ready to take this shift personally or financially. So we're all adults here. Please be responsible for yourselves. And if you have really specific legal or accounting questions, I am not going to answer those because you got to talk to the real professionals in that case. But I'm going to talk about how you find those real professionals because they're very important people to have in your corner. Okay. So I'm going to do a real quick story about how I got into consulting. So I definitely took the long and winding road into consulting. I actually started my career in higher education, traditional higher ed. I worked at the University of Minnesota and Hamline University. For those of you in the Twin Cities area, those two places. I worked in nonprofit education, then I took a turn in for-profit education, and then I switched over to healthcare. And I had this very long and winding road, all of which was sort of loosely tied around creating really great experiences for people, some marketing, some event marketing, lots of digital marketing, lots of things that sort of like tapped into my interest around creating great experiences and leveraging great technology. And those are things that have been interesting to me my entire career. But the way that I showed up and did that every day was different, obviously, over the course of my 20-some years in my life. And so, you know, with a degree in English and a degree in education, to get to the point where I was consulting in customer experience strategy and digital product and org transformations, there's obviously a lot of space in between those that I could talk for an entire hour about, and I'm not going to. I think the reality is all of those different experiences I had along the way, right? All of the different pieces of you know, fits and starts and experiences and trying things here and trying things there. I worked in operations at one point. I worked in customer service delivery at one point. I did event marketing at a different point. All of those things at the time felt really random, but now that I look back at them, I really look at the portfolio aspect of that really, I think, gave me some signals that I knew that doing consulting where I was going to be able to help multiple clients at any one time was going to be really fulfilling to me, because I never really wanted to do one thing every day, all day, for like extended periods of time. I kept taking these jobs that were sort of like interesting collections of work rather than necessarily super clear, cohesive, you know, books of work. And so that was an early indication to me that that I might be good in a consulting kind of environment. But I will tell you is that my last corporate gig was really hard in many ways. And again, I won't bore all of you with my therapy around my last corporate gig, but that was when I really realized I was really far from the work that I love to do. And it occurred to me that I didn't want to just be working on one organization. I wanted to be able to like dig in and solve problems for as many companies as I possibly could. I wanted that ability to sort of be able to bounce around from problem to solve, rather than just be sort of deeply embedded in one company for a long period of time. And those were indications to me that I was going to, you know, maybe find some success and some happiness in this consulting side of things. And so those were some of the things that drew me into consulting along the way. So what we're going to do here is I've got a couple of myths for you that I want to talk through, because I think it's important to dispel some myths before we get into the reality. So the first myth we're going to talk about is that consulting will bring me work-life balance. I'm going to tell you that when I was contemplating going out on my own, and it took me about 18 months to finally make the transition to, I think this is what I want to do, to I'm quitting my job tomorrow. It was about an 18-month time period. And I said to my husband, who has a long and storied career of having his own, he came out of graphic design and creative services and had his own agency and has been freelance for a long time. And I said something one night at dinner. I said, you know, I just want the work-life balance. And he like broke out laughing. And he said, if you think that consulting is going to give you work-life balance, you should probably make sure you're defining that term accurately. So what I will say now, 4 years in, is that he was absolutely right. I do not have balance every day, but what I do have is more control over sort of the ebbs and flows of personal and professional in ways that I didn't if I was in a corporate environment. I set the terms for when I work and how I work, and I set clear expectations about, you know, what is my after hours response going to be? You know, do I answer emails on the weekend? Do I answer emails at 11 o'clock at night? And the answer to both of those is no, but I set that up as the client expectation up front so that nobody's surprised. And I just say, this is what I need to operate well. I've learned over time, you know, what is my optimal client load so that I'm not working 80 hours a week, that I'm working the number of hours I want to have. And I'm not perfect at this, as I think a couple of people on this call, because I've got some people that I consult with, know that sometimes I falter in this area. But for the most part, I do have, you can set some boundaries in consulting that you maybe aren't able to in a corporate space. But I will tell you, you know, if you're a consultant, you have clients, hopefully, right? And if you have clients, they sometimes have emergencies. And, you know, sometimes when you take time off for vacation or illness, that's time that you're not delivering for clients. It's time you're not getting paid. And so that can make it really hard to really resist the pull of the pull to work all the time. And so it's something you really have to monitor, right? So the bottom line is, when you're self-employed, you'll certainly have a level of autonomy that's unmatched in most organizations, but every bright light has a shadow. And so you really have to have that intention and hard work to get to the kind of balance that you might crave when striking out on your own. All right. So the next one is that consulting is risky. I hear this all the time. Oh God, it just feels so risky. It feels like you're just out there on your own, not really, knowing what, not having a support network and that sort of thing. And what I will say is, it can feel isolating. I think it can feel risky because you don't have a paycheck coming every 2 weeks like you do when you're working for an organization. In my opinion, however, I don't believe that consulting is any more or less risky than working for big companies. And I think we could all just look back at the front page of the newspaper for the last, 6 to 8 weeks and see what all of those layoffs and all of that, those sort of sudden departures from companies look like. Certainly my inbox has been filled with people. Some of you may be on this call who have been, let go recently. And the question really is is this the time to sort of take things into my own control, right? So when you're working in a company, bosses leave, teams get reorganized, people get laid off, things can change on a dime, right? And there's a lot of uncertainty that I think people sort of ignore when they're in a corporate setting, because they believe that every 2-week paycheck is just going to kind of always be there, even if they know that that's probably not true. So consulting is going to force you to get out of your comfort zone a little bit, right? You're going to probably have to do some business development, and we're going to talk about that. But I will say that I feel more in control of my own destiny as a consultant more than I ever have as a worker in an organization. And because I know exactly what's coming in, I know who the clients are. I make decisions about whether or not they're the kinds of clients I want to work with. And I don't have a fear that somebody's going to come along and radically change my life overnight, change my job, change everything about it. But so the key here is not that consulting is more risky than working in an environment with, an employment environment. The key is that it's different kinds of risk. And so what you have to do is you have to adjust, because the kind of risk you have in a corporate environment probably feels pretty comfortable. It's a known risk, and you have to learn new risks and new sort of, triggers and warnings and things to keep an eye out for. And so it's that shifting of risk. It's not that there's one is risky and the other is not, in my opinion. Okay. The third myth is that you have to be salesy to be successful. So I hear this a lot, that I don't want to do business development and therefore I can't be a consultant. So when I hear that, I think, okay, there are some ways actually that you could do consulting, like working through a third-party consultancy and things like that. Maybe you could be independent, but you can share the load of business development with another company or maybe with other consultants. But what I would say is, don't dismiss business development out of hand. I think a lot of people say that because they've never actually done business development. And the other thing is there's a lot of different ways you can sell work. So if you think that the only way to sell work is to golf 3 days a week, go to the bar, out for dinner every night, that kind of thing, schmooze. I mean, maybe that sounds fun to you. That sounds absolutely awful to me, because I'm an introvert and I want to be home in my pajamas at night and not necessarily at a bar with people. So, that's my whole thing. But everybody's got to find their own way to sell their work, right? So my example is that I made a pitch deck when I first went on my own about my capabilities. It's very fancy, and I've used it once, because what I found is that it wasn't me. The one time I gave it, I felt like a pig on roller skates. It was so uncomfortable. And so what I do really like is having conversations with people. So my favorite thing to do in the sales cycle is to offer up a whiteboard session. I am never happier than I am when I am at a whiteboard with a dry erase marker. Made things a little hard during the pandemic, but we've managed our way through it with technology. but I get in the room with people to talk about their challenges, identify solutions. We brainstorm some stuff. They get a feel for me, I get a feel for them. And all of a sudden we've come to an agreement on like working together, and it's been beautiful. But that's my path, right? Everybody has to kind of find the way that they sell best. And then what I will tell you is that this idea of being salesy, all that means is selling in a way that's disingenuous to you. I think everyone can do business development. You've just got to find the way that's good for you. So those are my 3 myths. So now we're going to get into, for the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to just talk a little bit about some logistics, some stuff that I think is the advice that I typically give to people when they say, where do I start? I don't even know where to start. So there's a couple of things here we're going to walk through around building your team. I always talk about the paperwork, and I talk about the head and heart work. So we're going to cover both. Okay. So the first thing we're going to talk about is building your team. What I will say is this idea of being independent is a complete misnomer. Even if you are truly independent, you're on your own, you're selling your own work, you're doing, you're the only one doing the work. You're never really alone, and you shouldn't be, right? You should have a team around you. And so you might, like I said, you might be unaffiliated with a larger entity, but you've got to build a support system for yourself. And that's on you to do, right? Is to start to assemble these people. And some of them are going to cost money, and you might decide that you don't need them all at once. Remember though, that if you are running a business, you need business expenses, especially lots of consultants. There's very little overhead, right? Like I'm working from my home. The screen behind me was a business expense, but like, other than that, I'm not, I'm working out of my home. I don't have inventory. I don't have a warehouse. I don't have anything else. And as a business, you have to have business expenses, and your team is a business expense that you have to think about investing in yourself and in your business. So I'm just going to kind of go around the horn here. Really important is a CPA and accountant. And I would say that's one that you might want to think about sooner rather than later, because remember my thing at the top, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a CPA. My recommendation is finding somebody who's got experience in small businesses or other independent consultants. And because they understand that sort of like, okay, so you're an LLC, and what does this mean for your personal, your personal taxes and your business taxes, and how does that all interplay? A good CPA can give you advice on a lot of those things. And so that's been really important to me. I also have a bookkeeper. Now, some CPAs also do bookkeeping services. And what I will say is that having a bookkeeper to help you manage those expenses and tax stuff is really helpful. I didn't have one of those for the first 2.5 years that I was in business, and I made a lot of mistakes. And I had to pay my accountant a lot of money to undo those mistakes because I wasn't tracking things right. So, there is sort of a cost to doing it yourself and doing it poorly that you might want to consider in looking at that. Now, I also don't know that right away you need somebody who is going to do bookkeeping for you, but a CPA might be able to give you some guidelines on how to keep your receipts and your finances running smoothly until you feel like you need that kind of support. A small business lawyer is really important when you go out on your own, and we're gonna talk about LLCs and things like that on your own, whether or not you're gonna be an LLC or you're gonna be an S Corp or that kind of thing. Having a small business attorney help you make sure that you draw up the papers correctly, you get things filed correctly, can help you in lots of different ways. One of which is taxes, because sometimes depending on how you file your business incorporation will impact how your taxes will happen. So having an accountant or having a CPA who is willing to talk to your lawyer is also super helpful. An insurance broker is really important. I hear this all the time about insurance, especially around health insurance. And we're going to talk about the kinds of insurance you need, but finding an insurance broker who can help you find the right kind of policies is great. And this is one that doesn't cost you anything, because you don't typically pay insurance brokers. They get paid on the back end from the insurance policies that they help sell. So helping you find the right one can be really helpful. Coaches, I cannot tell you enough that having a good coach is super important. And I'm going to actually show you in just a minute a couple of coaches that that I know and have worked with, having somebody who can help you go through the process of leaving one identity of yourself behind as you move into another can be really, really helpful. And then you're going to need cheerleaders and advisors, and those come for free, but they may be your family members. They may be your former colleagues. They may be, new colleagues, people you meet through your network, and just having some people that you can text and send up the bat signal when something is great or when it's not so great, to be able to help you move along is great. The last thing I will say is that eventually you may want some execution support, like a virtual assistant or someone to help you with marketing or writing and social media. I would not start there, to be honest with you, because I think you got to get your feet under you first. But I would tell you that if you think you might be able to have somebody help you on those things, when you start having that thought, reach out and see if you can find someone. There's lots of good VA services. There's lots of good, social media support and things like that. I waited way too long for that. And I wish I would have been and brought in some of my helpers sooner, because I thought I had to do it myself. And it turns out I don't. And I have found people that can help me and make things look seamless without them really being me, which is a great way to extend your capacity. Okay. So these are a couple of the coaches that I've worked with personally. I'm going to pause here in case you want to do a screenshot. I have all of their LinkedIn profiles on here. I've either worked directly with these people, or they are good friends and colleagues that I have known for a long time, and I know the quality of the coaching they have. What I would say is, you don't have to take my word for it. These are not the only 6 coaches out there by any means, but what you really have to find is somebody who's familiar with independent consulting work and ask them for references. Most coaches will have an introductory meeting with you for free, so you can kind of get a sense of their style and how they work with clients, and then ask for a reference or two of people who have worked with them before and what it was like working with them. Fit is really, really important here, right? So you have to vibe with these people. So in that exploration meeting, ask them about sort of how they work with people. What does communication look like in between sessions? Sort of get a sense of their energy and approach, because it should feel like somebody you want to spend time with and you want to divulge some sort of personal your vulnerabilities, your anxieties with. You should have that trust there. And I'm a big believer that you probably feel that pretty early on in meeting someone. And if you don't, it's fine. You're not, just because you have one meeting with them, you are not beholden. You can say, I'm not sure the fit's there, or I'm not sure this is the right time for me, and keep looking until you find somebody with the right fit. Okay. Paperwork. This is my favorite part, because in some ways, this is the stuff that everybody gets hung up on, but it's also literally the least important thing about what your consulting is going to be. So please don't get hung up here. Don't get wrapped around the axle, as they say. Like, really seriously, like, work through this stuff and then move on with your life. So I will also say these are not necessarily the first thing you do, because you might need to spend some time thinking about how you want to work and your offering, which again, we're going to talk about in the next couple slides. But these are sort of the checkbox items that I always tell people to think about. So, and this is also, by the way, where you want to consult with your team, right? Remember I told you, find a CPA, find a small business attorney. You can do that relatively inexpensively to find somebody who can kind of give you a sense of what your particular needs are, so that you can make good choices from the front. So in my case, I started as an LLC. I filed with the Minnesota Secretary of State. They gave me a Minnesota tax ID number. Then I went to the IRS and filed with them, and I got a tax ID number from them known as an EIN. And that's kind of like your business's social security number, okay? I needed both of those things in order to open up a small business checking account at my bank. And I got a business credit card. Now, why does all of that matter? It matters a lot, because the number one thing, if you are going out on your own, for money in and money out, is no commingling of funds. No commingling of funds, okay? That means your personal money is over here and your business money is over here. If you have to take some personal money to put it into your business money, so that you have things to buy, like your business cards and, you pay for your website and whatnot, that's totally fine. That's called an owner's investment. If eventually you make lots of money over here and you want to take some money out so you can pay your mortgage and like buy groceries. Also cool, because you're either going to be paying yourself or taking an owner's draw or whatever. But the key is that you are not putting your groceries and your business cards and your website on the same credit card, because the IRS hates that. So no commingling of funds. If you're at home, I want you to write that down right now. So the business registration, state and federal, and that banking account are really important early items to make sure that you're like setting things aside and you're being super clear about your expenses and eventually your income associated with the business. Now, the other thing that people get all hung up about is insurance, especially if you're the insurance sort of person in your family, right? That you're the one that carries the insurance. And again, you have to investigate your own thing, but please don't believe the hype out there that individual insurance is terrible insurance and it's so expensive and I'm never going to find coverage. I will tell you, I work for a major insurance provider here in the state. I will not name names. And my insurance through the Minnesota Exchange is better insurance at the almost dollar for dollar same price when you factor in pre-tax, post-tax kind of things as I got when I was an employee for a major healthcare insurance company. It's better coverage actually, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to embarrass anyone, but you know, we're a family of 4. I've got teenage boys. They do crazy stuff. Now, we don't have a lot of pre-existing conditions and things like that, and everybody's situation is different. But if you find a good health insurance or find a good insurance broker, that person can go out and map all of your options and say, here's what you've got. So I think that, you know, don't let this be the thing that holds you back, because honest to God, a few minutes phone calls could get you some facts to tell you whether or not insurance is something that should hold you back. Then the other kind of insurance, and that's true for like medical, dental, disability, and life. That's usually the insurance you end up getting through your employer. And those are things that you're probably going to want to replace if you go out on your own and you don't have it through a partner or a spouse. The other piece of insurance is general and professional liability. And so what I will say is eventually you're probably going to need these things. I have found contracts with large enterprises almost always require that you have some sort of coverage. You might not go out and get that on your second day of being incorporated. However, you might want to kind of wait and see what your contracts look like. It's pretty affordable. We're talking about hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars. And I recommend Hiscox Insurance to everybody because I've found them to be absolutely the easiest to work with. You can do everything online. And I do have that link at the end of the presentation so that you guys can look up some of those links. And I also give the name of my insurance broker at the end too, in case anybody wants to call Greg. You know, he's only in Minnesota. So if you're not in Minnesota, he's not going to help you. But, you know, you can probably find some people like him in your own state. Okay. Taxes. We're all doing our taxes from last year, getting ready. My taxes are behind the screen right there. It's big pile of paper. That's why I have the screen up. So again, you're going to want to talk to somebody that knows your situation, but I can pretty much guarantee you're going to have to pay taxes, right? So decide with guidance about what you need to set aside from every single check you bring in and that you deposit in your first year as savings for taxes. So some references online will tell you to set aside 30%, others 50%. That's a lot. I get it. I totally understand. You're like, I just got my first check and it's like, you know, X number of dollars and you're telling me I got to put 50% of it away for taxes. Yes, I am. I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, that is what I'm telling you. But because if you set it aside, the only surprise you might get is, oh, I set too much money aside for taxes. And now I have this money that I can reinvest in my business or I can use with my family or whatever, what have you. But if you don't do it, guess what the other kind of surprise you're going to have is? It's an ugly, ugly surprise. I know somebody who didn't do this. You know, I don't know if she didn't set aside anything or not enough, but had like a $25,000 tax bill that she owed. Like, I don't know about you guys, but like, that's a lot of money. I don't have $25,000 sitting around. So, but if I had set aside a little bit every single month, you know, $2,000 every month, she might have had enough that she could have paid that. So what I will tell you is don't procrastinate on it. Don't say, oh, my first check I'm going to take in and then all the rest of them I'm going to set aside. start the habit from the beginning. It's like what they used to tell us all about retirement. If you start doing it when you're young and putting stuff into retirement, you hardly even know that it's gone. Same idea, okay? After the first year, your tax person in you, you're going to figure some things out. Maybe you're going to estimate your tax payments, and it's going to be less of a surprise. But this first year, because you're going to be self-employed, self-employment taxes are just a real beast. And just do yourself a favor, figure it out with your tax person and get into the habits early. Okay, that's enough of that. Now let's get into the fun stuff, right? Oh, 10-minute warning, Kimmy, you're killing me. Oh, I'm going to totally make it though. Okay, so the next thing is determining your offering. So what I will tell you is this is very introspective work, right? And you should not rush this work. I don't believe you should have a complete offering and, you know, written in ink or stone or on your website necessarily from the get-go. But you should give some thought before you go to market on like, what are you going to do for people? How are you going to deliver work for people? What are the ways in which you want to work? There is so Strategyzer is a resource I've used for a long time in my practice of being a customer experience person. They have a tool called the Business Model Canvas, which is a really great tool that you've probably used somewhere if you're in business, right? But the authors from Strategyzer did a book where they took it and they applied it to you, business model you. How are you going to be able to, you know, articulate your unique value proposition in this world, whether you're a consultant or an artist or a CEO, right? And so this book, I swear to you, I've sold like 150 copies over the years. So go out to Amazon and buy the physical book. Don't get the Kindle version because it literally is a workbook. I still have mine with all my little scratchy notes in it and my fun colored pens and everything. It's a really good project to really help get out of your brain what it is you want to do and how you want to do it. Okay, so one idea is to go through this, figure out maybe what this looks like, and then see if you could find a friend, a colleague, somebody who would fit into your ideal client, you know, sort of persona, and ask them to, not just in a pretend way, but to give you a project that you could propose, work back to, and ask them for their feedback on how you wrote that proposal. Is that offering make sense? Are you giving them the things that they would want to give? And so you can use it as like a little bit of a sandbox. You know, they might not have an actual project, but to actually go through the process in a real way of somebody asking, you know, exhibiting a need and you thinking about how you're going to meet that need will help you sort of articulate and refine what that offering looks like. Okay. So the next one I want you to think about is, are you a consultant or are you a contractor? And some people use these terms interchangeably, but I usually try to get really specific with people when I talk to them. So on the left-hand side, a contractor usually is like pretty much a one-for-one for an employee, right? It just is a matter of, is it whatever, a W-2 versus a 1099, right? They're going in, they're evaluating the need, perform the work. They're really just sort of functionally there to do the job that somebody else is telling them to do. On the other end is consultant. A lot of times they're evaluating the need and they're providing advice and opinion on what needs to be done, but they don't typically perform the work, right? Or do that implementation. Then there's kind of this thing in the middle, which a lot of times people are thinking about in more, especially at the executive level, as like a fractional or an interim leader, where they're kind of bringing the best of those two things together because they are responsible for both advising and executing on the work. And more that middle piece is being is getting more and more popular, especially for senior leaders coming out of corporate, because companies are saying, look, I don't know if I need a full-time chief product officer or a full-time CMO, but we know we're at an inflection point where we need that level of leadership, but we need someone to help lead us through it. And so that kind of interim and fractional space is becoming more and more interesting. So be specific about what you are. Don't go out there saying, I want to be all three. Pick one. Maybe there's a dial point in between them that you want to do, but that will help articulate your offering and help you think about how you might respond to client needs with your sort of desired format of work. Okay, Kimmy, I'm not going to get there quite on time. I'm going to go a couple minutes early, or a couple minutes over, but we're almost there. Okay, what do I charge? I can't tell you what to charge. I can't tell you right now. I wish I could just give you a number and then we'd all be done and we can move on with our lives. you have to really think about how you want to sell your projects, right? So do you want to bill your services hourly or on a fixed bid or value-based pricing? Maybe you don't know. Maybe you know and you have no idea how to pin that price, right? Ultimately, in the end, I'm a believer that everybody has to sort of figure out, they have to peg their hourly rate in some way, because even if what you're doing is your value-based pricing or you're doing fixed bid pricing, you still have to do some calculation of, my time is worth X, this project will take this much time, this is the value that we're outputting. You still have to have that hourly amount in your head somewhere, even if your clients never really see what that amount is. So my encouragement to you is think about it as a range, okay? So you're going to want to think about what the market is going to pay for similar services through different kinds of, consultancies or freelancers or whatever. And if you don't know, then you should ask and build a database. That's what I did. When I was going out on my own, I literally had no idea because I'd never hired anybody like me. So I really did not know what like market rates were. But I went out to people in my network who I trusted and I said, listen, I need to know what some people are making in this work, because if I don't, I'm not going to have any confidence that I'm pricing myself correctly. So would you be willing to share with me what you make? And I will tell you, I was floored with the number of people who told me. Some people didn't, but it was by and large, everybody was like, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. But a lot of people didn't just put it in an email. They're like, let me give you a call and talk you through it, because there's a range. If I'm on a longer term project, then I can go as low as this. If I'm on a short term project, then I go as high as this. If it's going to be a PETA client, a pain in the you-know-what client, I might have an upcharge, right? Like they kind of talked me through that, and I built a database. And what I started to see was some trend lines, and I thought, okay, I'm newer, I'm going to probably peg myself here. And then I continued to build on that database as I was working, and now I fall somewhere else because I've got more experience in consulting, but I know what the market is paying, and I think that's a really good way to go about it. Just so you know that, remember when I said on this continuum here, if you're a contractor, you are probably going to be working through a third-party agency, right? Someplace that does staff augmentation and staffing. You're probably going to have to do less business development. They'll be bringing clients to you and maybe be managing projects where they have, 3, 5, 10, 50 contractors in a company at any given time. In that case, when you go through a third party, you're going to pay, that consultancy is going to charge the client something, and they're going to keep some of that money, and you're going to only get part of it. So just make sure that when you're doing that, you're really pushing for transparency of what your rate is, what they're charging, and what are you getting for that margin that they're providing you too, right? I mean, obviously they need to make some money because that's what they're in for, but like, you should know that there's some value in there. It may be that, they're providing you with sick days, or that they've got, resources, or, lots of different things, but just make sure you're having that conversation about that gap. When it's direct and you're doing all that sales work yourself, you get to keep 100% of the rate. That might change then what your rate needs to be, right? Versus what a consultancy might bill for you. So these are all the different things to sort of think about. I really like to encourage people to think about a won't go lower than rate and a delighted rate, and then work to make sure that all of your work falls somewhere in between there. Okay, where do you find clients? Well, you're going to have to use your network. If you don't have one, we should probably talk about why you don't have one, because in this day and age, I really hope that most people have some kind of a network. But even if you don't love your network or don't feel like it's big enough, it's okay. You can build it up and keep working it here. And I would also tell you that you have probably more of a network than you think, right? Because you probably have a family, and you probably live in a community, and you probably have a job history of people you used to work with, and you might have classmates, and you might have neighbors. And those are all people that you should be curious about and thinking about what they do, what you do, where there might be opportunities in between that. And that doesn't mean you're going to go out and start selling all your neighbors on your consultancy, but you might be asking them and saying, hey, Ted, I know you work at this company doing this thing, and I do this other thing, and I'm wondering, do you guys ever hire consultants for that? That's how these kinds of conversations can kind of start to come up naturally, right? Remember that your network is not a sales list. It's a connection or a collection of connections, that's hard to say, right, for long-term mutually beneficial relationships. And so when you go out on your own, the first portion of going out on your own is really just nurturing and caring for that collection of people. Being curious about what's going on in their lives, what's going on in their companies, not trying to sell them, but just figuring out what the landscape is. And as you have those conversations, this is what relationship marketing is, you are undoubtedly going to uncover opportunities out there for collaboration and potentially for project work, right? So thinking about these things, I think, are really important. And I've got some books for you at the end. If you're not sure how to go about building that network, there's some really great resources out there, okay? Last thing, and then we're going to open it up for questions and we're going to stop recording. Okay, so how do you know you're right for independent work, right? What stories are you telling yourself about how you may or may not be successful? Are you telling yourselves any of those myths up front, right? I will tell you that this is one thing, this is another, right? When you move from your head into your heart, you're going to probably figure out some things you're super scared of. You're really worried about things that cause you anxiety. I'm not saying you have to get all of those figured out before you take one step, but make sure you have an inventory of your own issues and that you know you're working on them. Maybe you're working on them with a coach. Maybe you're working on them with a therapist. Maybe you're working on them by yourself with with a journal or with your, on your walks with your dog or whatever. But you're going to probably have to rewrite some stories. Mine, for example, I had 2 stories I had to rewrite. One was that I was getting a paycheck every 2 weeks for 25 years. Like, that can hardwire itself into your body, right? And I had to move from the space of, oh my God, I'm not going to have any money and I'm going to lose my house and I'm going to, have to live in my parents' backyard or whatever it is, right? Like, I had to rewrite that story to understand what abundance looked like in a new world. And that was a really, really important part of the stories that I had to rewrite. The other one was about title. Because when I went on my own, I was a VP and I really liked that title. And I don't think I really understood how much I liked that title until I had to tell someone, oh, I'm not a VP anymore. I started my own consulting firm and I felt shame. And I was like, why am I feeling this way? Why do I have this feeling of shame in here? Because in my mind, that was less than a VP. And now I'm like, no, it's just different, Jennifer, but whatever. Those are the things you got to figure out, because if you don't figure that stuff out, it's going to follow you along for a long time and it's not going to help you out. It's just going to be baggage that you're dragging around. So really do make sure that your head and your heart are aligned in this and do the work. That's my biggest advice to you. So here's what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to show you 2 more slides and then we're going to stop the recording and we're going to go into questions for the last 10 minutes. So first of all, my information is here. If you have any follow-up questions, you want to follow me on LinkedIn, anything, like you want to go read my blog, I would never say no to that. But you can go out if you're interested in product management and digital transformation. I highly recommend it. But feel free to connect with me after this and let me know if there's anything I should have covered in this. And the other thing, and this will be in the presentation that I sent to you, or that I send out to you, so you'll have all this information. A number of the people that I've talked about today, Greg, my insurance broker, Hiscox, which is the business insurance, some of the books I've referenced. These are all things that I continuously refer people to all the time, and I get no kickbacks on any of these. So follow the links and have fun, okay?